Hi, if you're in the market for a freezer, whether it's a small under-counter one or whether it's a big boy like this one here, then it can be really confusing because there's a lot of choice out there. So what I've done is I've come up with 10 things to consider before buying a freezer. Just before I start, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, just give us a quick thumbs up. So although this list is in no particular order, the first couple I suppose are quite important to think about. So the first one is whether you want a freestanding freezer or whether you want an integrated freezer. A freestanding appliance, like this one, just stands on its own. As it says, it's freestanding. Whereas an integrated appliance will normally sit within a housing and it has a furnished door on the front. Now, some people like the integrated items because it enables you to, in theory, hide them within other cupboards. And for a lot of modern kitchens, that's the way that people are going. But that's number one on the list, freestanding or integrated. Number two is the size of the freezer. Always have a measure up to see the space that you've got, whether it's the width, which tends to vary between 55 and 60 centimetres, or if you're in inches, then it tends to vary between 21.5 inches and 23.5 inches. But the heights vary a huge amount. There's not really a standard height. If it is an under-counter one, then it does tend to be 85 centimetres, or around 33.5 inches. But as far as the height, then on some of the tall ones like this, then there's not really a set height. So I'd always recommend having a look, see if there's any limitations. For some people it could be a shelf that's in the way. If you're not limited, then this leads quite nicely into number three, and that's the capacity on the freezer. And the main reason I mention capacity is because if you've had a freezer for say 10, 15, 20 years, then what you'll find is that the capacity within the freezer is smaller than on your old appliance, if you stick to the same external dimensions. And what I mean by this is that if you have a look at the thickness of the wall going all the way around the freezer, then nowadays it's a lot thicker. And the main reason they do that is manufacturers are trying to get a more energy efficient appliance. And one of the ways to do that, which is quite an easy way unfortunately, is to make the walls thicker. But what you're doing is you're actually losing capacity. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a cheating way of doing it from the manufacturers. I wish they would just come up with better insulating technology and have nice thin walls like that, for example, which if you had an old freezer, chances are that's how thick the walls were. But capacity is always going to be really important, and clearly that will depend on the size of the freezer to an extent. But if you are having a look around, then check the capacity, because you could find, and we do find it as well, that sometimes they can vary by 10, 15, even 20%. Number four, where is the freezer going to be located? Now, if it's going to be in a house or a utility within the house, then that's not really an issue. I suppose a couple of things to consider. First of all, is it near to any heat source? Some people insist on putting a freezer next to a cooker, which is never going to be ideal. What you want to make sure is that, make sure it's not near to ideally a radiator or cooker or any heat source, because that can have a huge impact on the freezer. What it will do is it will have to work a lot harder to keep all the food down to temperature. And clearly if it's having to work a lot harder, it just means that the lifespan of the freezer is going to be a lot shorter. That's the first thing. Whereas some people want to put the freezer out into a garage or in an unheated room. Now this can be an issue because for some manufacturers, they say that minimum temperature could be around plus 10 degrees. For some other manufacturers, then, I mean, there are one or two on the market where they can actually go down to minus 15. And that has a huge advantage, especially if you're going to have it outside into a garage. If the freezer's in an unheated room or a garage, then during a cold spell, what will happen is the freezer could think that it's cold enough when it's outside and then just turn off, because it thinks, well, I'm down to the temperature I need to be at, then I'll just turn off. And that's not always the case. So what will happen is that the freezer needs to be brought into a warmer atmosphere for it to turn back on. And that's basically what will happen if you were to ring a manufacturer to say that the freezer's gone wrong. First of all, they will ask you whereabouts it's kept. If you say it's in a garage, then for some manufacturers, they'll just say, well, you need to bring it into a warmer area or wait until the temperature warms up. And if that's the case, then, well, clearly all your food is going to go off by then. So that's number four on the list. Check to see what the ambient operating temperature is of the appliance. Number five, do you want a frost-free freezer? Now, a frost-free freezer basically means that you normally have a fan within the freezer circulating air to reduce the amount of ice buildup you get. Now, for some people, especially if you've had a frost-free appliance before, then it's almost a no-brainer. I think long gone are the days of people enjoying defrosting a freezer, especially something like this. Now for some of you watching this, you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't you want to go for a frost-free appliance? Now there are some disadvantages with frost-free appliances. First of all, it can be a little bit noisier when it comes to the running noise, especially depending on the surface it's sitting on. You could find that with the fan circulating, especially if it resonates a little bit on the floor, then it could be a little bit noisier. Also, you can find that capacity inside the freezer, you can lose a bit as well. On a tall freezer like this, then you wouldn't notice it quite as much, but on an under-counter freezer, there are not too many on the market, there's only a handful, especially here in the UK. But what you can find is the bottom compartment is normally a lot shallower on a frost-free appliance. So just have a quick look at that. So if you're thinking you want a frost-free appliance, just compare the capacity on the frost-free and the non-frost-free version, and you can find that it could be quite a bit of difference, especially on some of the smaller under-counter ones. There are also some freezers on the market which are called low frost, and they're not necessarily frost-free, but it's just the way that they operate. You only need to defrost it probably every 2 or 3 years, and that can have a huge advantage because you don't normally have a fan circuit circulating the air. Put my teeth back in. But it's just the way they do it can be really efficient. When I talk about efficiency, that tends to lead quite nicely into number 6, and that's the running cost of the appliance. Now, I was just talking about frost-free and non-frost-free. Now, one disadvantage of frost-free appliances is that they can cost a little bit more to run compared to a non-frost-free. I suppose for most people, it's almost a no-brainer, and they don't want the effort of having to defrost it. Personally, if that's the camp I'm in, then I'd much rather have an efficient running frost-free appliance all the time. I've not really got the time or the inclination to start defrosting something like this. Something else to consider is that if you are going to switch the appliance off, defrost it, then turn it back on, the amount of electricity it consumes getting it back down to temperature is going to be a huge amount as well. So the actual running cost debate as to frost-free or non-frost-free probably isn't quite as big as you think. But anyway, on to number 6. That's the running cost of the appliance. Now, each appliance, whether you're buying it in a showroom or online, you should be able to see one of these. This is the energy label, and this is showing you how much electricity that the freezer will cost you to run over a year. So that's showing you that it's 288 kilowatt hours per annum. This is a really good guide as to how much it will cost you to run the appliance, and especially I always think it's really important to have a look at these because the freezer is on all the time. It's not like a washing machine or tumble dryer where you're using it on the odd occasion or once a day or however often it is. This kind of appliance is running all the time. So that's why it's really important to have a look at the energy label. Now for some people, you might look at this and think, well, this Hotpoint model is an F rating, that's not that great. A lot of the refrigeration appliances, around a couple of years ago now, the energy labels were all changed and the manufacturers are working on getting the appliances more efficient. They are gradually getting there. It's a bit of a slow burner for us. But have a look and compare different models, because there might be a certain price range that you're looking at and there might be one that really stands out as being more energy efficient. If it's more energy efficient, in a nutshell, it's going to cost you a lot less to run. Also, just while I'm here, on the energy label, it'll show you things like the capacity of the freezer and also the noise level. Number 7, and this is something some people don't really think about, it's the inside furniture of the freezer. Now, what I mean by this is it all drawers? Is it shelves? And how is it all arranged inside? Now, on this Hotpoint appliance, most of these are drawers, and personally I always like drawers. I just think it's so much easier to get the food in and out, to find things within the freezer. Sometimes they have handles on the side as well. You've got a bit of an indent in this one, so it's not quite as easy to carry, especially when it's full of food. But what you've also got, and some manufacturers are really good at this, is that you've got the flaps here. And the main advantage of having this kind of arrangement at the top is that you can first of all take these out, so you could just take the fronts off these. You've also got glass shelves in here, and the main advantage of having shelves is that there could be certain times of the year, say around Christmas time, if you've got a massive turkey to put in, or if you were a baker and if you were baking cakes and if you wanted to put a tall cake in there, then you've got the option to take this out and you've got one large surface area. So it's things like that that can make a difference. So as well as just checking the number of drawers or compartments you've got, have a look to see how it's all arranged as well. Number 8, does the freezer display the temperature? Now for some people, I suppose like on here on the front, there isn't any indication as to how cold it is. On the inside, then you have got a little display, so it does show you the temperature on there. For some other appliances, you'll have quite a nice clear LED display on the front. There are 1 or 2 manufacturers that we do really well with, where you've got a nice clear LED display. Now personally, I really like that. It is a good indicator, first of all, to make sure that the appliance is working okay, because sometimes if you, for example, had a power cut, and if the freezer's been off for a while, then it's quite important to know the temperature that it's operating at. That tends to lead quite nicely into number 9. Does the freezer have a door alarm? Now, I suppose the two are sort of connected, because if the freezer door has been left open, then you want to know that the appliance is going to tell you. Now, personally, I think if you've got kids, especially young kids, where they're going to go into the freezer to go and get an ice cream or a lolly or something, then you want to know that if the freezer door is left open slightly, then the freezer is going to tell you. I've had it before, and we've had it many times over the years that I've been selling freezers. I've had it so many times where customers come in and they've had kids where they've just left the door open accidentally. It's not normally done on purpose, but it can be really frustrating, especially if you just lost all the food in the freezer. So just have a look to see if the freezer has a door alarm on it, and that will normally be an audible sound, so it's normally just a beep or something to tell you that the door's been left open. And then number 10, finally, you've got things like the cost and the warranty of the appliance. I know that's sort of two together, but I didn't want to carry on too long. I just wanted to make it 10 things to consider. But anyway, the cost of the appliance is always going to be an important factor, and you will find that the cost of appliances will vary a huge amount, mainly depending on the brands. You'll find some cheap brands are probably about half the price of some of the more expensive brands, but you can find that sometimes paying a little bit more, you can get extra benefits. So that's all I'd say. Just have a look through the list, because you could find that, for example, if it could be a case of paying, say, £50 or £100 extra, and you could get a much more energy efficient appliance. You could get one with a nice display on the front with a door alarm. You could get a frost-free one as well. So I hope you found it useful and interesting, the 10 things to consider before buying a freezer. All I would normally say is please give me a thumbs up on my YouTube video, click subscribe and leave any comments below. I'd always ask for comments, whether it's good or bad, about the video. If you've come here and if there's something you thought that I might talk about and have not talked about it, or if you've got any questions on freezers, just pop it in the comments below. And if you've got a freezer at home and you've had either a really good experience or a really bad experience with it, then let me know in the comments about why you think it's a really good or bad one. Anyway, thanks for joining me today.